We're back with Attorney Curtis Vandervelde. We're talking about, of course, Public Law 22-73, and of course this class action lawsuit. Now, Curtis, we're talking about land here in Route 4 and all that, and I mean, there are probably more people who are not living next to them. So, are we talking about properties and just a part of the island, or the whole island in general?
Well, according to the report from the Inspector General, there were certain specifics that he pointed to as examples. But, for example, the estate of Rita Salas owns property upon which My Road, going out to the prison, is crosses over. And the report identified that substantial portions of people's private lots have been taken for other public uses, such as schools, water wells. So this is a situation which has not just limited itself to the people who are along Route 4 and 4A. The problem is prolific over Guam. And, you know, people largely kind of sit back and don't do much about raising their voices about this matter because of the fact that maybe it's only a small portion of their property that was used. And they're trying to be good citizens. But still, the law requires, both the Constitution, the Organic Act, and Public Law 22-73 require that these people.
Well, and this is what gets me with this, because again, just last week, a week before, the published names of people who are delinquent, and these are not delinquent 20, 30 years back, maybe a couple years delinquency, and you know, come July 6th, the government will buy them and take them for theirs, and maybe some, if not all, a great portion of these properties that are maybe delinquent. Maybe a great portion of them have government easements, and they haven't been carved out by the government and says, okay, this portion don't pay for. And over the years, maybe the government owes you more than really what you owe to the government. How is the government, you know, how are they going to settle that equity there? Because the government is going to foreclose on you, but when the Constitution says you're supposed to compensate me for your taking.
It provides the opportunity for people to use as a defense the fact that the government of Guam owes them money, and for them to be able to do it on an individual basis. But for some people, the amount that they would get compensated where the roadway crosses over portions of the property isn't so substantial that they can afford to hire a lawyer and bring a lawsuit and get the compensation. That's why it is that we're proceeding in the form of a class action. And sometimes governments rely upon that fact that they're, in large part, just taking small nibbles here and there.
So people now, I mean, say they fall under, you know, same thing as the estate. How do they participate if they're not particularly or specifically named in the suit? How do they participate in this action when they know that for sure this is my map, and look at now, I mean, this is my property, look how much road there is, look at the utility easement, look at this, I'm still paying taxes on this whole lot. What happens in this class action lawsuit, because there's only one, it's for the estate?
Well, in most instances, the landowner who owned the property at the time the property was taken has passed on, and it's their children which own the property. And so what I've asked people when they call me is, please provide me with copies of the documents that show, for example, they may have a map that shows, a survey map that shows a portion of a public utility on their property, and they have never been compensated for it, or they don't know if it's been compensated. And they have copies of the documents by which the property has gone from their ancestor to them. And I asked them to please drop copies of that at my office, along with contact information, including email address, so that I can create an email list and then start communicating with people as a group, because that's what it is that I proposed to do by the class action.
Now, since, again, with that, they're not specifically named in the suit, if they want to participate, you've already filed with the court, is it too late for participation? Is it? Yeah.
No. When you have a case that you're bringing on the basis of a class action, one of the first stages after the complaint is answered, assuming that it survives, is to move the court for certifying the class of people who are governed by the lawsuit. And then you move forward on behalf of the class. And so that's part of the procedure. People will be included. The problem is that we all know on Guam that the people who are more vocal about having been injured are more likely to get attention and more likely to get compensated. And if they don't become vocal, it's very easy for people in positions of power, whether it's the court, whether it's the executive branch, whether it's the legislative branch, to turn a blind eye to their problem. These people really need to begin to become vocal, because it's the only way they're going to make. Well,
and that's my thing in them being vocal, because when I'm looking at this, and then the Inspector General had again forwarded some information in regards to the land and the lack of compensation from the government of Guam to the owners whose lands were taken. You know, citing not only the Organic Act but the Constitution. To me, I'm going, it's, you know, the government is indefensible in this. I mean, they may use some legal maneuver to say, well, you know, you didn't file this, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. But a taking is a taking. I mean, again, there are laws, and we still are bound by the U.S. Constitution and the Organic Act that, you know, yeah, there's eminent domain, but even in that case, you can't just take without the compensation, whether it's monetary compensation or a land exchange.
Yeah, and the Inspector General's report recognized that it had been the practice of the government of Guam to exchange portions of land that it owned for other parcels of property that they had used but had not provided compensation for. But because of the Chamorro Land Trust legislation, and because of the Ancestral Lands legislation, the government of Guam doesn't have any property anymore to give to people. And therein lies a significant part of the problem.
Well, I mean, I'm sure, again, as the veto message back then under Governor Ada, I'm sure, you know, whatever governor is at Adelup, once this hits or whenever it's settled or whatever, they'll say, well, you're going to bankrupt the government because this is hundreds of millions of dollars.
It doesn't have to result in that kind of an effect upon the government. What we're really trying to do is to get the government to move along and to follow the law. Everyone is expected to follow the law. We're just asking them to follow the law. Now, you don't have to get compensated immediately. We can tell historically these people haven't been compensated immediately. So there is a way to resolve this and to phase in compensation over a period of time, and not to put the government in a position of being unable to deliver the services that it needs to its people.
Well, the government does that. It told us last week, a couple of weeks ago, it says you have to pay the government for what you do, for what is due. And if you're delinquent, this is how much you'll come in, please pay it. Otherwise, you know, we're going to do something with it so we can get the money to provide the services for the government of Guam. And so the government can do that. I guess, you know, when you owe me something, let's make a payment arrangement. I don't want to bankrupt you. You still have to live. You got to eat. But likewise, you got to make me whole. The sooner the better, eh?
And, you know, I think that the governor, I think that the present attorney general, and I think the members of the legislature are people who have good intentions. And I just urge the government to finally really dedicate themselves to doing what it is Public Law 22-73 said. Public Law 22-73 required the government to do what the Organic Act and the U.S. Constitution require. It is the right thing to do, and it's just a matter of becoming committed to fulfilling that obligation. And if the government becomes committed to being fulfilling that obligation, then it can be phased in where there is not a traumatic effect upon the government or its operations.
Or an offset.
It can be done.
Or an offset. Or offset. You may owe some money to the hospital, you owe some money to taxes and things like that. And you do an offset. I mean, we're trying to do that as well with the federal government and FINA for what they owe us for Compact Impact, yeah?
And that's part of what was done when they settled the EITC lawsuit. It was that people who were entitled to their EITC compensation, who only got 50 cents on the dollar for what they were entitled to, but they also had to use whatever they got to pay their bills to the government of Guam. But when those transfers are made and debts are extinguished, we don't waste resources pursuing bad debt collection either.
Sure.
So ultimately, it can end up with some very positive financial effects for the government. But let's be absolutely clear. People of good conscience are going to want to do what it is Public Law 22-73 said. If they don't want to do what Public Law 22-73 said, then they really they need to do some soul searching, because it's absolutely fundamentally right to compensate people for property that the government takes. And worst of all, to continue to tax them on property that you won't let them use and on an ongoing basis is completely unjustifiable. There's no way in the world that it's fair to tax somebody on property that you're not letting them use anymore. That would be tantamount to saying that all the cars that I previously owned while I lived on Guam, I still have to pay registration taxes for, even though I don't own them